Staff has an update on the Broadway Boulevard Euclid Avenue to Country Club Road Improvement Project. Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, the next agenda item is to talk about the improvements to Broadway. We'll have Mr. Cole, our transportation director, up here, and Jennifer Burdick, who is a project manager, who was probably in 8th grade when this whole thing got started. But we have gone through a very extensive process to discuss the various issues associated with the project. There are a number of citizens who are very much concerned and have provided a dialogue of advocacies that is very important to the processes to where we're at today. The Broadway Citizens Task Force, we also have a technical advisory committee that have been very poignant in terms of the project, and many discussions and dialogue have occurred. But I do feel that we are now at a point in time where staff needs direction, and recommendations are going to be made to you as to where we feel we need to go to progress with the project. Specifically, at the end of the presentation, I'm going to be asking that we take a look at these recommendations and get your approval. And they deal primarily with the capacity and the lane widths of and the lanes that are going to be on Broadway, and the dialogue that has occurred respected to that. And what we're going to be talking about and recommending is that there are some viable options, and there is an option that are not viable. Specifically, we feel that it's going to be recommended to the mayor and council that the 6+2 option is not viable because it's a lack of performance and cost effectiveness. We feel the 4+2 and 6-lane options are viable because it's the most functional and provides the most availability for modes of transportation for the future. The two other options that are not viable is the 4-lane option because it fails to meet minimum requirements of functionality and a lack of right-of-way for future dedicated transit way. And the last option is to do nothing, which we feel is not viable because, one, we would have to pay back the RTA somewhere around $7 million, but also the encumbrance of maintenance and of Broadway would fall on the city of Tucson. And Mr. Cole has articulated to me that that number could be somewhere between $17 and $20 million. We'll also be asking that you give us direction to continue to working on the project, to work on other issues that are corollary to our recommendations, but we will be asking direction specifically that we work on the 4+2 option and the 6-lane option because it's the most functional and it provides the best transportation options for us for the future. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Cole, and they will provide the presentation.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a couple of comments before we start, just to kind of frame this discussion, because I don't want to sit through the presentation and just come out at the end of it with more questions. This is the packet that we were sent. I would like to make a couple of comments on it. On the first page, it says that the work done to date by both, this recommendation supports the work done to date by both the CTF, which is a citizen task force, and the project team. That is not true. The citizen task force does not support the proposals that were being presented here today. On the next page, it discusses the 4 lanes, saying it meets a no diminishment of functionality criteria set by the RTA board. We gave direction to the task force months and months ago to consider sustainable criteria with respect to the definition of functionality. And so if we are now being told, again, it's the RTA board's definition that's going to prevail, then we need to know that. And more importantly, the task force needs to know that. Who's deciding the definition of functionality? Because that really is the linchpin of much of what we're talking about. On the next page, it discusses an overarching vision statement. The citizen task force input and public input received through meetings and large-scale community meetings. Without exception, at every single one of those large-scale community meetings, we have heard three principal goals for this: that it create a sense of destination, that it preserve the existing businesses, and that it take into account multimodal transportation. Under the present consideration, it says the Broadway project team and the CTF request input and direction regarding the alternatives. There appears to be only one alternative that's not going to cost us money, and that needs to be vetted out here. You need to be really specific. I'm going to ask them really specific questions, and they require really specific answers, not, well, maybe this and maybe that, or we're wasting our time, and more importantly, we're wasting the citizens' time on this. Well, I'll get to the option in a second. And finally, the project cost estimates are expected to be within the RTA budget of $71 million. That's not accurate based on the charts that we're given, and I'm going to get to. And finally, it says a 6-lane alternative does not constitute a substantial change. We can't keep just talking about lanes. There are crosswinds, there are alignment decisions, and so to the extent that we get caught up in this discussion of how many lanes is it going to be, it eliminates the whole creative conversation that's happened with this task force for the last 18 months to 2 years. Task force has been meeting for 18 months, 2 years, it feels like 10. Our prior direction, and Huckleberry and Benavides have also weighed in, Benavides being the RTA attorney, have said that we need to consider creative options. We've had 2 public forums, as I said, at least 2 public forums, unless I've lost track, multiple CTF meetings, and as I said a second ago, we keep talking about a sense of destination, keep talking about multimodal, and we keep talking about preserving the existing businesses. Functionality, I just mentioned a second ago, we said we need to consider a variety of metrics, not just level of service, which is how long it takes you to get through an intersection. And last week, my sense walking out of that CTF meeting was that the entire process had been flipped on its head, because the task force was told you effectively have one option that you're considering. You keep, the city manager says we have 2. The only fundable option, fully fundable option, was 6 lanes at 118 feet. By the way, that now meanders to the south, which was not something that was on the ballot, which was not something they saw before last week, and now it's taking out businesses on the south, some of whom had been given specific commitments, assurances by the RTA and the PAG and our staff, and based on one whom went out and took out a $300,000 loan and put her property into escrow to buy a building right next to her. And then she went to that task force meeting and saw the alignment cutting right through the building that she had just put into escrow.
When did this come?
The task force, the technical advisory committee held a meeting, and present at that meeting were John Beal, Camila Beckett, Ann Chineka, Carlos De Leon, Donovan Durbin, Albert Elias, Leslie Ethan, Damian Fellows, Nicole Gavin, Jonathan Mabry, Hector Martinez, Irene Gata, Rebecca Roop, Adam Smith, Andy Squire, Diana Schwartz. Those are our people. So is the recommendation being made by this task force from the technical to the task force from the technical advisory committee, or is it city staff's recommendation? It was explicitly said that was a task force technical advisory committee recommendation, but all these people participated in that meeting. So who's really making this recommendation? I referenced a second ago the options that are on the table. 6 lanes, 180-foot right-of-way says staff recommendation, make this the alternative priority focus of the discussion right now. 4+2, however, says that repayment of expenditures to date would be required by the RTA and Pima County. Now, we've been told that we know Pima County's into this thing for $25 million as a part of the project budget. Are we being told that if we do anything other than the 6 lanes, that we're going to lose the $7 million plus the $25 million? Are we talking about $32 million being taken off the table? Or is it 7? Who's making that decision? What is this governing body's authority to get in, to weigh into that? Can the RTA unilaterally pull those dollars? Can the county, what process is involved for the county to pull that $25 million? We need to know these things. The task force needs to know these things. And until it's really clarified, until we get more clarity on that, the process has to go forward with the 4-lane and the 4+2 as a part of the conversation. But when you, so I'll pull off to the side, watch the presentation, but we need some really specific answers to those questions as to who's driving this. I'm not willing to put $32 million at risk at this thing. I'll be right up front about that. But if it's not, then the task force needs to know it, this body needs to know it, or we're wasting that task force's time. We also need to walk away from here with the task force knowing what specific design input are you being allowed to give without putting $32 million at risk. And if it's simply a few trees here and a bus pull out there, then they might as well go home.
Yeah, Darrell, I'd add to that in maybe a slightly different tone. I think the work that's been done by Councilmember Kozaczek to date by the members of the task force has actually been pretty incredible. When I came into this, I was told this was 8 lanes and, you know, there's nothing but that. And due to this idea of functionality in particular, and due to the work of the Citizens Committee, I think we are looking at some options that work and some options that don't work. But I do think it's important in your focus to, I need to still understand how we're defining functionality and who's defining it, okay? I also need to understand with clarity, and I think the task force, they're owed this too, because these folks, the only thing that is of concern is that these folks have put in a whole lot of time, and you need to kind of explain to them, first of all, the value they put in, they have put in, and that doesn't need to be explained. But, you know, when did we determine, because I'm with Councilmember Kozaczek, if it is a fact, and I think it's much more than that, you know, if it is $17 million to do the sidewalks, if it is $7 million to the RTA, I don't think it's $25 million, but you explained it to me, to Pima County, but I think it's $25 million of our property tax dollars that would otherwise be put into the city that the county would have no obligation to put into the city thereafter. And I think it's the resurfacing of the streets. So if we're left in a situation where if we ever want to improve Broadway at all, it's going to cost us close to $50 million, that's a real justification to tell the citizens that's not viable under any circumstance. But what is viable, and I think this is Steve's other point, is if we're going to look at either 4+2 for transit, you know, and from my perspective, we have to have the transit infrastructure if we're going to expand at all, because the people that I talked to, that were the people that were responsible for bringing the streetcar here, they want 4+2, and the reason they want 4+2 is they want to see mass transit. Their vision is to see a streetcar down Broadway someday, and it's not viable otherwise. But I think in fairness to all the people who have put in the time, those questions need, whether I haven't even read the PowerPoint yet, those questions are the questions that we all need answered, okay?
Let me add one more final thing, and this is back on the project cost summaries that you've got here. This was a bond project that was valued at $71 million. And so as I read the input from the Technical Advisory Committee, I'm seeing that there's a 6-lane alternative that minimizes building impacts with a project cost of $92 million. So we need to know, either the Technical Advisory Committee is saying, you do this alternative, and it's going to cost you as the lead agency $21 million because we're responsible for costs above 71. Or if you do anything else, we're pulling $32 million. So it's kind of a Hobson's choice. Are we paying 21? Are we paying 32? Or what's, you know, what decision-making authority do we have without getting extorted by the other agencies involved in this conversation?
Fair enough. Mr. Cole?
Hand it over.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. First of all, I want to say
the Broadway task force, your task force that you appointed, has done a stellar job. They've worked at this for 2 years diligently and done an awful lot of work just to bring us to the point of where we are here today, to even having this type of discussion. So they need to be commended for all the effort and the work that they've done in this endeavor. We can go in through the questions if you'd like, or we can go in through some of the presentation and go that direction. I would recommend we kind of walk through some of the presentations. I can turn it over to Ms. Toothaker Burdick to discuss that. We have a short presentation if you'd like, or we have, which has got a natural stopping place, or we have another one that goes all the way through the entire slides, and we can see how it progresses from there.
Well, let's do the presentation, and as you're going through it, if you've heard the questions, and just emphasize the answers to that for everybody. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I appreciate being here to give you an update on the project. As everyone has stated, and is absolutely true, we have made a lot of progress in the last 22 months. It is almost 2 years now. Incredible. As everyone has said, but cannot be said enough, we have an intensely committed task force that has given hundreds of hours just in meeting time alone. That doesn't even take into account everything that they have done to prepare, meeting with their own stakeholders, reviewing materials. What we've done is put at the beginning of the presentation, if it lets me, there we are, revised recommendations. And they're revised because I want to point out that we have handouts that were given to you today that are different than the memo you received for this item. The handout is the April 30th Citizen Task Force members' recommendation for your consideration today. That was a consensus decision they made for your review today, and that's what the focus of this presentation really is on at this point. The revised staff recommendations take into consideration what the task force recommendation is. There is requests to you today for you to take action on, and that has become part of our staff recommendations to you. And hopefully through the information that I'm able to convey and that Mr. Cole and I are able to convey to you, you'll be able to do that. We are looking at task force recommendations. They now are considering the 4+2T, so that's the 4 lanes plus 2 dedicated transit and 6 lanes. They have requested declaration from City of Tucson about the funding viability of the options on the table. Because as we move forward in this process, we have a public meeting coming up at the end of the month. We do not want to mislead the community in any way about what viability the options have. What staff has prepared is and has incorporated the task force for 4+2, 6 lane, and the 2 additional options that staff has kind of mulled through, which is doing nothing. We did a sidewalk-only addition study that basically told us if we do nothing, we are going to be left vulnerable to maintenance costs that get into that $17 to $24 million range.
Jen, let's be clear again. This is where I think both Councilmember Kozaczek and I have had a little frustration. You can be very clear and straightforward about it. If we do nothing, or if we do, well, the do nothing on either end of the 4-lane option, which is essentially nothing, anytime we go to repair Broadway, which is going to need repair, and that cost there is about $5 million, correct? Mr. Cole?
If I may, Mayor, specifically to that situation on this length of Broadway, if we do nothing and we go with a no-build option in this area, and we in the future want to resurface Broadway in the same limits that we're talking about here today, the first thing is we will have, it will trigger the resurfacing or paving will trigger the ADA accessibility requirements along this area. There'll be $1 million in sidewalk. There'll be somewhere between $3 and $5 million in asphalt alone, and somewhere between $17 and $24 million from our estimates today of relocation and buying of properties along this corridor just to put sidewalks alone and repave.
So that's just so everybody's clear.
No build option that we have in front of us.
Just so everybody's clear, Mr. Cole, including the folks here today, to do nothing, to ever see another bit of asphalt on sidewalk would cost the city $24 million. Yes. It doesn't require a whole lot of conversation, does it?
That's correct, including what we would have to pay back the money that we've already expended because we took the no build option.
Well, that's the other 7 million.
Correct.
Okay.
So, Mr. Mayor, this is, when you say the 4-lane option is not viable, this is what you're talking about?
No, what we were just discussing just now is the
No,
no.
no, no, no.
It is,
What
it
the
is.
mayor's saying, what the
Yes.
mayor is asking, when you say the 4-lane option is not viable, you are saying that it's basically if we do nothing, if we leave it as is, it's going to cost us money.
The 4-lane is different than the do nothing. The
Okay.
4-lane is as if that were a design recommendation that came out of this process. The likelihood, I mean, the certainty that it would not be funded by RTA is there. So
Okay.
in essence, by choosing a 4-lane option, you are essentially doing nothing. That's where staff is coming forward with the fact that if the 4-lane moves, the 4-lane is not viable because if it won't get funded.
We have a 5-lane option right now sitting out there physically today with no pedestrian elements and very poor bicycle elements. We do have 4 lanes of pavement in each direction, but there's a differentiation between doing no build and going forward with the construction of a new 4-lane build, because there's some differences, and that's what the differences are. And the differences are I believe that the RTA's ballot language is 6+2. We've gone back through their processes, and they've talked about functionality, which you don't diminish functionality. When you talk about 4 modes, and there's many performance measures that we've looked at, but 4 of the basic modes, when you get into the 57 performance measures that they have been talking about, they being the task force and ourselves and staff, there are 4 basic modes of transportation that we plan on using. That's the pedestrian, the bicycle, the transit element, which is many different levels of elements, and the car itself. Of your ride share that you have today, 95% of your ride share is in the car, 5% are the other modes. I believe, and then saying that, Broadway corridor is the highest transit corridor we have in our community today. 10% of all riderships use Broadway. So we know, and it's been this way for many, many years, we expect the transit element to grow over time. It may not be there today where we think it's going to go, but we think as we progress, as we grow, as the cost of gasoline and all the different measures come into place, we believe that transit element is going to grow, and that's going to be a vital piece of our transit element, whatever that may be, whether it be bus, transit, streetcar, and or light rail in the future. So we think it's critical from a planning and programming point of view to make sure we have the transit element as a critical piece as this goes forward. So in saying that, going back to the 4 no build, what we started on, if we go out, I don't believe that the RTA with their diminished functionality issue, don't diminish functionality.
And if I can add to that, it's not just the diminishment of functionality, it's also that whatever project design is approved through this process must be compared with the original project scope and must do better. And we are actually at a position where the data shows a narrower project design could do that. And that falls within the realm of the 4+2T and the 6,
But
and not the 4.
And we believe we've come to that conclusion with all the technical information that the task force has brought up and all the different information they've asked for. We believe we brought it to that point today, and that's why we're here talking to you, because the task force, all their efforts have brought us to this point. And I'll let
Okay,
Jennifer
so
continue.
this is staff recommendations based on conversations that happened with the task force.
Yes, so what I'd like to clarify is that and we have the task force members here. We have our chair, Mary Durham, and actually, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but can we applaud the task force members that are here for a second? May I ask the task force members to stand up and come forward?
While they're coming forward, would you consider 4 travel lanes with a wide enough median in the center to accommodate transit at some future date to be a 4-lane option? If it, in the same time, it incorporated bike and ped amenities on the perimeters?
Can I answer that? The data that we have at this point, and what we, as we're moving forward in this design process, have to remember, we need to defend a design in the end that will achieve success for RTA and for the county. A 6-lane, we know from county, will not be or anything less than a 6-lane will not be funded by the county.
Okay, Jen, you know what? Let's just go through the presentation
do
and
that.
hold it.
That should have been said to the task force 2 years ago.
Correct, but, you know, you can't also, you know, put the spilled milk back in the carton either. So let's have, if you guys would mind sitting down, we appreciate you being here. Let's run through the presentation.
Well, no, I actually, okay.
Run through the presentation. Let's run through the
I'm sorry.
presentation,
Get
and then we'll
through.
come back.
Yes, okay. So what is also revised from the original packet materials that you received is that it is explicit here in this recommendation that the 4+2T and the 6 are viable options, and that would be the declaration we're seeking from you today. The and so these declarations here are what we are seeking from you today. They're built off of the recommendations that the task force has approved at April 30th meeting, seeking declaration of the funding viability. Additionally, in the request from the task force, there's a request to the mayor and council to address the need for parking policies and implementation strategies that will help mitigate the impacts to the properties and the project area. That is something that staff has been working on from multiple departments: Office of Integrated Planning, Economic Initiatives, Planning and Development Services, real estate attorneys. It's a host of complex issues, and we're muddling through it, but we absolutely support that the mayor and council direct staff to continue that work and to bring to you as soon as possible solutions that would address these issues. Additionally, the other motion we're looking for today is the task force is requesting more time to work on how transit is provided for in the design and implementation of the 4+2T, and staff supports that. Trade-offs of the alignment variations with neighborhoods and property owners, this gets at the weaving that Councilmember Kozaczek was bringing up. There needs to be time to deal with that, and that's absolutely appropriate into this next phase of work that we'll be conducting with the task force. The definition of functionality, Councilmember Kozaczek brings up the sustainability performance measure. That absolutely can move forward, and there is support broadly for the task force to continue working on definition of functionality, but we cannot forget that there is a basic minimum requirement that the RTA has stipulated, that mode of travel must be measured. And that is the basic requirement that we're finding through the traffic data that's been done, is leading us to realize the viability of certain options over others. So the variations of the alignment, that ties into the weaving. That is something absolutely the task force should be able to continue working on to achieve a consensus decision on a design alignment for a process. So we're recommending that mayor and council direct TDOT, the Broadway project team, to continue that work with the citizen task force and the technical advisory committee. In the end, it is absolutely the task force's recommendation to you. It's a consensus process with the task force. However, what's being asked of you today is to help clarify things that we know right now are kind of red flags or issues. We do not want to continue to put the task force in a position of working on things that we know will not be funded. This is the task force recommendation. I had wanted to have Mary Durham, our chair, read this. And Mr. Mayor, may we do that?
Sure, go ahead.
Our chair is Mary Durham Flipson, and she is accompanied by Dale Calvert and Colby Henley.
Good afternoon, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak to you today. So you've just heard some recommendations from the Technical Advisory Committee, and as you've been told many times, it's different than the Citizens Task Force. And so we're here to just clarify that our process is a little different, and where we're at is a little different than where the Technical Advisory Committee is. So right now, where we're at with the public process design work and technical assessments, and all of our discussions and decisions to date have led us to the fact that we have 3 alternatives on the table right now. We have a 4-lane, we have a 4+2T, which is 4 lanes plus 2 transit lanes for a total of 6, and we have the 6-lane. And we currently have several designs for each of those, particularly looking at pinch points along the roadway where there's particular tightness as far as trying to save buildings, save property. We've taken the 6+2T design, which was the 8 lanes described in the ballot, off the table because modeling has shown us that it does not perform, nor is it cost-effective compared to the other options that are still on the table. We have a set of performance measures that are our working definition of functionality, and they're broader than just vehicular performance. And at this point, there's nothing in the performance of any of our 3 design alternatives that we have on the table that clearly eliminates or precludes one. It just depends on which performance measures you're looking at. Some perform better than others depending on what you're looking at. We feel very strongly that the 4-lane alternative should and must move forward because, at least to the next public meeting, because we've had 3 public meetings so far now. This is going to be our 4th, and we have heard repeatedly over and over from the stakeholders that it's our job to represent in this process that they want us to consider the 4-lane. What they're really after, the sentiment behind that, is sparing property, sparing people's livelihoods, and preserving the way of life in the neighborhoods. So that's where we're at this point, and Dale's going to let you know kind of what we're looking for now.
Okay. First of all, the funding issue and some form of indication where you stand as far as the funding issues are going to be critical. They're critical to people understanding what's going on. It's critical that we have that out there before the May 22nd public meeting, because as a practical matter, that funding issue really affects the options. And ultimately, that's an issue you're going to deal with, whether you deal with it today or whether you deal with it a month or whatever down the road. The county has their own agendas, etc. There is a question amongst various people who come to the meetings. There's very clearly questions amongst the commission, or the task force, I should say. Sorry, I slipped into Parkwise mode. That as to what the funding options really are. And I think that is an unknown that the task force has struggled with. I think the public struggles with. And any assistance along where we're going as a city along that line would be helpful to the task force. The parking policy issue, I totally support what Jen had to say. You know, as some of you know, and you probably said, not him, when he walked up here. I have been on many, many transportation planning projects. And I don't care whether you were talking about Campbell widening in the early 90s from the University Hospital to Glenn and its ultimate resolutions and changes, whether we're talking about Grant Road or whether we're talking about Broadway. There is one issue that comes up every time that you talk about property acquisitions. The property ownership is divided, and how you're going to deal with parking is a real difficulty, because there are so many options out there, but it all involves bringing people together and putting together packages, etc. And we're dealing with people who don't really have the skills or the legal assistance about how to accomplish those things. We're not typically talking about traditional developers, those kind of people who have those capacities. There is, through all of these projects, that one theme has always been there: how do we deal with the parking? Obviously, if one property says, I want to go away, I want to retire, and you can buy my property and put the parking there, that works. But to bring all of these people together. For instance, on some of the projects, you have very thin property lines. You can put 2 parking spaces in front of them or 1 parking space in front of them. You really need to consolidate parking. There's really no efforts to do that. We've even had Donovan Durbin from Parkwise come talk about what Parkwise can do. And under the current charges for Parkwise, there's very limited things that Parkwise can do. So, any direction and support of that effort is really critical to try to help resolve the property acquisition process. We would like to see, and long-term wise, again, I've been around a long time, so the idea has been to put transit on our primary transit corridors, which is Broadway South 6. That's been the #1 corridor since 1989, when I first got involved in transportation issues, and it's still true. And so the need to have that, the need to look at this corridor and say, when it comes time for a busway or for transit, to have the right-of-way available to get through that area is really critical. Let's see if I've missed anything. I think I've covered it all. Anything I've missed? Okay. Very good. The one thing I would encourage is I'd like to see us be able to have some declarativeness as we go back in this May 22nd public hearing as to where we can go, what the options are. I think there is very, very strong public support for the 4-lane options, and that has some serious implications to the community. I don't think the task force needs your help in saying where it goes, and I don't think that should go off the table until those options are told to people at that May 22nd meeting. If it goes away at that point, we'll have to deal with that. I know that there is supporters here of a 4-lane option, it's out there. I'm probably not the right guy to be standing up or saying this, because I'm one of the people who said it needs to be a 6-lane option, but I think there's also a communication process that we need to go through to clarify this. So, thank you.
Dale? Yes. I'm sorry to do this. May I ask you, the last thing that you were saying is you don't think the council needs to direct the alignment process, but the declarative statement about funding viability for the 4 plus 2 and 6 is needed today?
Yes. I think
Okay.
that's the thing. I don't think you should ever take political advice from an accountant. But there is a political impact here that we need to be aware of, and there is a great deal of support for that 4-lane option. And I think to reject it out of hand, I think, has some concerns.
And I think to follow up on that, the concerns of moving forward without communicating that there are issues with the funding viability of the 4-lane is, so it's a disingenuous absolutely to the process, and if the 4-lane is politically very popular, the reality of us being back here at the table to discuss the very issue of the 4-lane is very likely, and at that point in time called under the carpet for being disingenuous about the process. And I think that's where staff is very concerned that, and requesting the council's help in declaration of the viability of the 4-lane option.
Councilmember Luke.
Could you could you address the question about the 4-lane option with I don't know whether it would be the dedication of the existing center lane to transit or to to the streetcar? I mean, has that been discussed not only to look at this in terms of the design, but also potentially actually targeting some of these dollars toward achieving some transit functionality that would fit within the 4-lane option?
So here's, if I may,
Yeah.
convey that the 4-lane with dedicated right-of-way falls within the spectrum of a 6-lane width.
Uh-huh.
Now, the 6-lane, in the way that we are reviewing it, is absolutely looking at, can we accomplish with 95% right now, actually low 90% of all the users on Broadway are in autos. We know this. We know that there's also alt modes. It's not as easily quantifiable. We know that on Broadway, we have 5 to 6% of the mode shift is in buses. And that's 10% of everyone using a bus in the region. A 6-lane, if we're going to move into looking at 4+2T, which is exactly what Dr. Cole is promoted. That gives us the opportunity to really investigate what is the reality of the 4+2T. How can our design for Broadway how can the design for Broadway implement transit in a way that supports local bus service today, enhances it? The only way you're going to grow transit ridership is if you actually make it better.
Right.
Reliable, it's fast, and there's opportunities to grab it, more frequent opportunities to take transit.
So is it really the cross width that we're being asked to not to say, oh, this is a 4-lane versus a 6+ whatever? Is it the cross width that you need from us so that, and then if it turns out that it's 1 lane for bikes, 1 lane for cars, 2 lanes for the streetcar, you have the cross width that can achieve functionality versus the lane definition at this early stage?
I think they get kind of confused, and the clarity that I think would be helpful to make right now is, to get to this point, we've had to talk about what are the elements of the street that we're looking at. To get to this point of having comparative data, we've had to do apples to apples to apples. We've looked at the kind of same thing across all 4, 4+2, 6, 6+2, the 8-lane, the 4, and the 4+2 and the 6 have the same right-of-way width. That was just to get our comparative data. We are looking at variations means that there's pinch points. There are ways we can squeeze down the widths of sidewalks, medians. There are things that in that 118 feet may not stay 118 feet. It may narrow and then at intersections widen, but that's the point of the next step in the design phase, is looking at, we have the 6-lane, we're saying staff is supporting, look at the 4+2T as well. A non-starter for the 4-lane is that it's precluding transit from tax point of view. If you say a 4-lane, and the width of 96, that could reduce, you're precluding a dedicated transit way, and that's tax perspective and that's not just from different agencies, it's also from city staff. It is a fatal flaw.
So just from a layperson's perspective, right now we have 5 lanes, right? It would be a 4-lane if the middle was dedicated to transit, right? And that's why I just want to make sure that we're not precluding an option like that to extend the streetcar down, and that's a 4-lane option. So that's why I'm reticent to say eliminate the 4-lane. Do you see why I'm
4+2 option you're describing?
That's the 4+.
Oh, 4+1. So is the 4-lane to actually narrow the cross width right now?
No.
No, so why would we eliminate something that's the existing footprint because we're calling it a 4-lane when the existing is actually, I'm just confused. I just want to make sure we're not voting on something
You're
without.
drilling down on exactly the issue, and that is we're fixated on the number of lanes and not on the cross width and what they do. And by taking this recommendation saying we can't talk about 4 lanes anymore, we're effectively saying we can't talk about creative design of that corridor irrespective of the number of lanes, but what does it do? How does it function? And you have said, Darrell, multiple times that we need to get the utilities out of the middle so we can make that a transit corridor down the middle of that thing someday. That could still be 4 lanes with transit down the middle. So to eliminate it now from the conversation just buys right into the concept that all we're talking about is the number of lanes and not what it does. Also, the 4+2 still has that caveat on the bottom that we lose $7 to $32 million. So that has to be addressed very specifically.
And that I would say we're doing today and saying that staff would revise that the repayment would come off for the 4+2T.
But this was the TAC recommendation, not city staff's threat.
There,
Correct. If I can,
Yeah.
just to weigh in a little bit. You touched on the apples to apples correlation. We had to have a correlation to set the level playing field, just to discuss from one to the other, where we're talking all red delicious apples or golden or whatever you want to call them, at the same across the way. My vision in seeing this go on, and we use 6 lanes, and Councilman Kozachek is correct. 6 lanes is a concept of what we believe it looks like in the future. Now, does it narrow, and there's some pinch points in here that are really tight, that maybe we may have 10 and 9-foot lanes in certain areas, and we may have a 12-foot sidewalk through certain areas, and it may be a 5-foot sidewalk in that one area. One of the things the task force has done is it's looked at the modes and it's looked at performance measures. It's taken care of the car. Start over. The pedestrian, it's got nice wide sidewalks. It's looking at 0 lot lines. It's looking at the trees and the cover, if you will, along that, and creating that sense of place of one of the performance measures. That's one of the things they've worked really hard. So they've improved that mode of transportation from the pedestrian to a great, great degree. So it's a big winner in that, from that mode. The bicycle has been a mode as well, using the sidewalk, but it has its own trail, own side trail off behind the curb, as well as on the curb itself. So the cross sections they've been considering take care of those 2 elements, those 2 modes, and done a super job of doing that. The other 2 elements are the ones that they've struggled with the most. The car, what's predominant today, and that transit that they want to grow in the future. And it seems to be a real stronghold that we want that transit. So if we do purely, and we call it 4 lanes, you can call it whatever way you can use. We could use feet, but it seems to apples compare. We call it lanes. So we call it 6 lanes. We call it 5 lanes. That can be changed. But where the pinch points are, where do you lose capacity from weaving it in and out, is at those pinch points. You're going to lose it some in your sidewalk. You're going to lose some in your road width lanes, if you will. You're going to lose some of that, and then you're going to widen back out where you have some freedom. You have the 12-foot lanes and the sense of place and the cafes that they're looking for and that storefront view. So it is going to meander just because you want to, and they're doing everything they can to meander this to make it work from the sense of place. So to say we call it lanes, and it is lanes, because we're looking at, and my vision would be to put lanes down either direction, and I haven't weighed in at the task force, but I mentioned it to Councilman Kozachek, is to build all the utilities outside of that center lanes. Put your bus today, your express bus and your regular bus service down the middle. Move all the utilities out, of which we've been doing the streetcar. The biggest expense we've had in all the streetcar work is all the utilities and changing that all out. Get that out of your cross section. Build your lanes in each direction, down the middle, if you will. Build your spots, put all the technology in, put all your stops in there as you can. Then, what is the peak hour for the car from a mode transportation point of view, where we can increase that or help that diminished functionality, make sure we don't diminish it? We have peak hour in the morning, we have peak hour in the evening. So we run those during the peak hour. We let the cars use all 6 lanes. But midday, from like 9 to 2 or 9 to even 3:30 or so, which we see a peak ridership in the transit side of it, put those dedicated lanes in there and dedicate those lanes during midday. where you have the best of both worlds while we're making that transition to growing the transit. So we have 5% of it. If we can get better service, dedicated as a hybrid approach, using dedicated service midday during those middle lanes by using technology and those whereas that way the cars can't use it midday when that's when the highest transit use is. The highest vehicle use is in the mornings, the morning and afternoon commute, your morning commute into the center city and your afternoon commute out of the center city. Those are your highest uses. So try to do some hybrid approach, and as you grow transit, then you dedicate those full time. But today, I think we need that width and some of the flexibility of the task force to come to that. So we call it 6 lanes, and they're going to have to do some real tight maneuvering in certain areas. We have some places that they really want to save from a land use point of view. We have a school out there that I think is really something we want to go. We have a church that's been on and off and has some discussions. There's some real tight areas that we want to look at. So the bottom line is I think we need to go to 6 lanes, take the 6+2 off, take the 4 lanes off per se, because we can't get dedicated transit, and build something in between and allow that task force to complete that. But as long as we go out to the public and say 4 lanes, we're going to allow you to build that, and then we go to our funding folks and say, hey, now it's time. You, the RTA, you, the county, you said your ballot language says 6 lanes, and yours other one says 6+2. Going from 6+2 to 4, I think is diminished functionality from one of those modes of the car, and or maybe even transit. Although the other 2 modes, the pedestrian and bicycle, win no matter what we build. Those other 2 modes, we lose functionality. I don't think we get their money. We go to the county and say we're going to build less than the 6 lanes that you have on the ballot language. I don't think they're going to go for that either. In fact, we have letters from the county administrator saying, no, you build less than 6 lanes, we're not going to go. So for us to go out to the public and give them the idea that we can build this lanes that we talk about, I think is not a good decision. We need, it may be less than 6, it may be 5.5 or whatever that is, that we actually get down to the details, but since an apples-to-apples comparison, we've been calling it 4, 6, and 8. That's what we need to continue to call it, and that's why we've called it that, because that way you get a continuous comparison. So I think it's just flat not the right thing to do, to tell the public that you can go out and build a 4-lane cross-section when I personally don't believe we're going to get the funds to do so from our funding partners. We have very little money in this, except for a lot of time and effort by a lot of citizens who have been working really hard. They need some guidance from you today. Usually the guidance is coming from them to help you, but they've worked so hard, they need a little push to get some guidance to let them finish this task that you've asked them to do. That would be my view.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Let me understand this. So I'm going through the math over here, because that's what I like to do. We have 118 feet. We're talking about 118 feet. It seems that there's some serious contention on the pinch points about the 118 feet, right? Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line. So let me ask this, and I'm just asking. Is it possible to, in the places where we can, where we hit the pinch point, can we get that to 96 feet? That's the question.
And the answer to that is, I think that's one of the task force's projects they have to get through.
See, I don't.
Can they actually get there? Because can you weave it in? Can they get the elements that we're all trying to get in, the pedestrian element, that bicycle element, as well as the transit and car element? Can we get that in without diminished functionality? And I'd say yes on the pedestrian. I'd say yes on the bicycle, highly likely. The other 2 elements is a measurement. What does that do, and how do we do that? So the answer is perhaps, and I think we can get close, but I think that's what we want to ask them to do.
Daryl, I don't know if I speak for everybody, but I think everybody is looking at the transit task force folks, and we're getting their facial reactions. You have your back turned, you're kind of at a disadvantage. But trust me when I tell you that I don't know if anybody here is comfortable about moving this thing forward unless you can guarantee us that on the places that are sensitive, we can get this thing down to 96 feet. Otherwise, we're not going anywhere. So that's what I need to know.
And if you're just talking about feet, but not saying go to 4 lanes, I think that's possible. That is part of this refined design process moving forward. The challenge is we need to make sure that all modes can function, and so you have 8-foot landscaping, 8-foot sidewalks, 7-foot bike lanes that are factored into that 118 feet. All of that can be narrowed down.
I ride every day. I ride my bike almost every day. And you don't need 7 feet on each side. It's great.
Right.
I mean, the fact that we've got that is awesome, but I won't need that the whole route. I run a lot. I walk on. Steve has been on every sidewalk in this city. I can guarantee you he doesn't need 8 feet of sidewalk the whole way. We've got landscaping that can kind of come in and out. And by the way, as far as the median goes, yeah, we should have a median, but we can hourglass it into a double yellow for 45 feet if it's going to save a building that we need to save. So I just want to make sure that if we're going to go over, you can get if you're telling me you can get down to 96 feet, then maybe we can do what we got to do. But I just want to be sure, because if we can't, then we need to come back. And I don't know procedurally if we need to do this today, or if you want to go back to the Transit Trust, the citizens group, and talk to Steve. I'm looking for you right
We
now.
haven't, I can tell you, we have not got into the design functions, but they've got a whole bunch of performance measures they've looked at. They've got some elements that they know they'd want in here, and we want to close this out. We're trying to get there. So can I say it's 96, or is it 98? Is it less than 118? Absolutely, because you're going to narrow those. But can I tell you today it's going to be 96.137 feet? No, I can't tell you that, because they haven't gone through that design yet. But can it be narrowed from the 118 at those pinch points? Absolutely.
We can go on Google Earth and measure how far it is across, and if we can make that distance, let's make it. But if you're cutting the median down in certain areas and cutting the landscaping on each side, just so those 3 lanes, hourglass or veer in, so that the road aligns and we have our 2 transit lanes and our 2 4 transversing lanes, then what's the problem? I don't.
We agree.
I just want to make sure we can do that.
Councilmember Scott.
I'd like to move this because they're looking for direction. So how about a simple motion? The bullet point number 2, take the 6+2T design alternative off the table because of its lack of performance and cost effectiveness. I'd move that.
We got a motion and a second on that. Let's take that one at a time. Any further discussion on that one? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye.
I'm just trying to move this thing forward while we conjecture all day long. It is also on bullet point 4, it says, decide that the 4-lane alternative should move forward to the next public meeting along with the other 2 alternatives because of the strong voices in the public process that support the 4-lane alternative. That's what the Citizens Task Force would like to do, is move it forward. So I'd like to make that as another motion.
Jen, is that what you were looking for here today?
It is fine for it to move forward. I think the declaration that we need to communicate about the 4-lane is its funding viability.
Well, that's,
Well,
I mean,
well,
that
Jen-
would be presented at the forum. So I'm not talking about the money. I'm just saying they want to have another opportunity for input. You can give them what other details they need with regard to money. Would that be a good? So
I think
Mayor-
the task
Mayor,
force was
before I
also
go on,
asking.
I'm sorry
go
to
ahead.
interrupt.
Go ahead. I'm just throwing stuff out to try to be helpful here.
The viability, I don't believe our funding partners will fund a 4-lane. So we're going to come back and hit the same table here again, have the same conversation when the county and the RTA say, we're not going to fund 4 lanes for you.
So instead of what I said and what the Citizens Task Force says they would like, what they want, what you're asking us to do is to eliminate the 4-lane option.
We're living up the 4-lane option, but still, yes, that's exactly what I'm asking you to do.
Identify it as not viable. for
Not
the
viable to be funded.
So, Mr. Kozaczek, I'll turn to you for your wisdom as to whether or not you'd like to eliminate the 4-lane and leave that to you to make the motion, should you wish.
2 things that are being missed in this conversation. One is that and this is still being missed and or ignored by the RTA, and that is that the traffic projections that this entire project were based on are 30 years old. They're not being met. They're outdated, and even the RTA admitted that several months ago, several years ago. I don't know how long ago it was. Dale Calvert is exactly right, though. The linchpin of this whole thing is funding. And I'm guessing nobody at this table is going to say, if we're looking at losing $32 million in road repair or road construction money, I think that would be a tough sell at this table. But we've got 2 years of investment for this task force. They deserve to hear and when I started this thing, I said, I'm going to ask some really specific questions and hope to get some really specific answers. And I don't think we've heard yet whether or not anything other than 6 or 4 plus 2 is going to, well, even is 6, is going to cost this community $32 million, 25 from the county and 7 from the RTA. Does it or doesn't it? Do we lose those $32 million or not?
With a 4+2?
No, with the 4.
With the 4. Yes, we do.
And the Board of
Lose
Supervisors has
funding.
voted on that and has gone through the process, and the RTA Board, not their staff, not the TAC, Technical Advisory Committee, but the RTA Board has voted to pull those dollars.
Well, I think, just to be clear on it, they're waiting. See, this is what's not right about what you're trying to do today. All we know is that the Technical Advisory Committee of the RTA has said 4-lane doesn't work. Now, the RTA is a much different body than this. It's a regional body. It's a body that really does look at the entire valley. And so they give a lot of deference to their technical people. If it does not go forward, that's $7 million back for sure. If it does not go forward, the county has $25 million into this project, which they don't have to put there anymore. That doesn't mean it's our $25 million. It just means $25 million that hasn't been in to the city that would have been. If we ever want to do other work on Broadway, it's the cost of the repaving, which will now be a city cost as opposed to an RTA cost, and it will be a sidewalk cost, which will now be a city cost as opposed to a sidewalk RTA cost, which is probably another, according to Darrell, $25 million. I don't know why our council has to tell you that when you go to the Citizens Task Force that these are what the costs are, okay? Those are what the costs are. What do you want? What are we supposed to say? We know those are the costs, and what isn't fair to these guys is to go through that whole process and then come back here. You then tell us those costs, and we say, well, we can't afford another $32 million. And so, and somewhere, I mean, this is just like a little bit of Alice in Wonderland today to me, okay? And I'm sorry for being frustrated by it, but if you're telling us clearly that it will cost an additional $32 million, assuming the county and the RTA don't go forward, and that those are fair assumptions based on the information you have, that's all you can tell us today.
That's correct.
Okay. Anybody else? Councilmember Romero.
Your advice to the Mayor and Council today was to eliminate the 4-lane. We'll talk about feet and those details later, and eliminate the 6+2, which were the two outliers. But the Citizens Committee says move it forward because there's a lot of input still to be had by the community. There's still a lot of questions, right? And then below that, their additional recommendation is to be very forthright about the potential for not funding the 4-lane alternative. So why don't you do that? Why don't you go back to the community and say, these are 3 options, the 4, the 4+2, and the 6. But the 4 has all of these issues that still have to be worked on. There's potential no funding coming from RTA or from Pima County. So really, what are the options on the table? Because I think we feel uncomfortable because there's still a lot of questions and there's still a lot of community that wants to give input on the process. That's what I'm hearing today, that there's questions about, but you have to be as forthright as you possibly can with the community by telling them, Pima County has sent us 4 letters saying they're not going to fund a 4-lane option. RTA Technical Advisory Committee have said that they're not going to fund a 4-lane option. And present it to the public as you are presenting it to us. And with the problems of if later on in 10, 15 years, or in 5 to 10 years, we need to resurface Broadway if it stays at 4, guess what, folks? We're gonna have to pay for sidewalks, and it's not gonna be additional space for transit, and we're going to pay another $32 million or more to resurface and add new sidewalks. to a road that will not contain more space for capacity. So, I mean, that's what I'm
And
what
Darrell,
I'm hearing. I know you wanted a different outcome today, Darrell, but it sounds as though colleagues are not too comfortable by saying, let's just eliminate the four, or maybe I might be wrong.
well, Darrell, and there's going to be a group of people, you're going to lay out all the facts, and there's still going to be a group of people who are going to say, we don't care, we don't want any change, we want 4 lanes. Then you have to come back with your best recommendation as your professional responsibility to the entire city and make that recommendation and make it in no uncertainty, no equivocation. And then we make that final decision. And that should have been done today, quite frankly. Councilmember Ulick.
Well, and it's difficult because it's hard to know how to best serve in this moment. I think the truth is we're being asked as a body to vote to save the community a lot of agony. And that we went through this on Grant Road, where we made it clear we didn't want to put citizens through a big process. We wanted to know what are the non-starters up front. And it's been a struggle the whole way through. The truth is, if there is a desire for 4 lanes, we are not the body to persuade that that's the right option. It's the RTA Board of Directors, which votes in a public forum and is accountable to the public, a broad public, the regional public, and the County Board of Supervisors. I mean, I will be honest to say that if the county and the RTA Board say we're not funding this, I can't, in good conscience, suggest at this point that the city could come up with funds for a 4, nor could we necessarily forego. I think it'd be a great service in this process to have the ideal and have a fallback, because if those 2 bodies officially vote, we ain't funding any of this unless it's a 4+2 or a 6. We do need guidance, because I suspect we're going to need to do one of those 2 things to be responsible in a fiscal sense to the community. So, but for us to vote, we're not the ones saying the money won't be there for a 4-lane, and I think we need to make that clear, and also say if a 4-lane is at all a desire of the public and this group, get on the horn with the County Board of Supervisors and the RTA board members and get us that money, help us, because we don't seem to be getting any traction to make that case.
And
Go ahead, Councilman
Mayor, you
Casacho.
want to speak?
Sure, go ahead. No.
I would also point out that Supervisor Elias has asked for a block-by-block description of what this proposed, what all the options look like, and so he's starting to get engaged in this. And so I agree completely. In fact, I said 20 minutes ago, I wouldn't support taking $32 million off the table either. But we've got a process that that these people are engaged in. By the way, Jen has done an absolutely heroic job in this, trying to balance all the issues. And so I'm going to move the Citizen Task Force recommendation that all 3 options go forward to the public meeting. And then you guys have got to lay it right out on the line. The board, and you're right, the Board of Supervisors has to get engaged in this with respect to funding issues, because we get one letter or an op-ed from Mr. Huckleberry doesn't mean that that's definitive or authoritative. And the RTA has to weigh in also, so we know what the options really seriously are. So that would be my motion.
I'll second his motion, and I want to be ensured that the 6+2T option is no longer viable. We took that off the table for you.
Right.
Right?
Before we vote, Mr. Manager, do you want to speak to this?
So I
I should
want
have
to
followed
ask,
your advice.
has the information, financial information, been offered to the Citizens Task Force in the past?
Yes.
And so they do have that information. The assumption here was they're not sure about this, about the
The last
4-lane?
task force meeting was the first time these dollar
Okay.
threats were made.
No, that's not true. That is information that was shared at the charrettes in February 25th, 27th, March 6th, and March 7th. So these are things that, this is information that has been coming out since February for the task force.
That we are losing $32 million in funding if we do anything but 4 plus 2 or 6. Or, in fact, last time it was just 6, because 4
That-
plus 2 still had that on
That
the
has become
table.
a lot more clear with the recognition of the sidewalk-only study creating,
Yeah, and in fact, it was only today that you put the 4 plus 2 back on the table. Because 5 days ago, they were still looking at losing $32 million. So
correct
what you
staff
said is just not accurate.
recommendations.
And just so this council's clear, they can make that as clear as day, and you could still get a different task
Well,
force
right.
recommendation, and we may have to make a decision based on our
Yeah.
accounting. You know, it's funny that Mr. Culvert says don't take political advice from an accountant, but maybe we could take some accountant advice.
Yeah.
And we may have to do that.
Yeah.
So we've got a motion and a second, I think.
Yeah, and just, and maybe by way of clarification, because we owe it to the public to be this clear, I think. If the 4-lane option comes back without identified funding sources to cover that 32 million, I am very doubtful that it will pass this body. And so we trust you. You get it. I mean, and so functionality, if that 4-lane is something to pursue, that's going to be a key question. And I think that's fair to state
And I think
explicitly.
you can take that statement back to the group. All right, so we've got a motion and a second on the table. All in favor, say aye. Anyone opposed? All right, you've got your
Thank you, Mayor
instruction.
and Council. We appreciate it. We apologize for putting you in this spot. Typically, task force and commissions take that away from you and give you that cover, but we appreciate your working with us. Thank you.